we're very excited to be presenting some new insight that we have literally been collecting over the last couple of weeks, focusing on the US market. And the US market for our business is one of our growth markets and one of the largest markets in terms of where our clients are focusing. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So it's a very important market to our clients and to our business, and one that we're very excited to be working in. So just to give a little bit of context and background, we're starting with a base of around 225 million adults in the US, of which 145 million are wine drinkers. That means that they drink wine at least once a year, so quite a low base. Thanks, Steph. In terms of frequency of wine consumption. And then within that 145 million, we have 90 million regular wine drinkers in the US. Now, regular means, in terms of research and the base here, people who buy and drink wine at least once a month. Certainly in my world, regular is much more frequent than once a month, and I'm sure maybe for many of us in the industry it is as well. So that's our base of drinkers in the US, and that's who we can and could be targeting. How has that shifted over time? Well, I just said we're now looking at around 90 million regular wine drinkers. If we wind the clock back in the US market 10 years, we had a base of around 55 million regular wine drinkers in the US. So that's over a 60% increase in the number of drinkers available to us in that market over the last 10 years. What else do we know about changes over the last 10 years? Well, we know that consumption per capita has increased from around 10.5 litres to just over 12. If you spend a long time analysing and looking at those numbers, actually what we're seeing is this growth in terms of cases, so from 239 million to 310 million cases, 9 litre cases in the market over 10 years. That growth is primarily coming from a larger base of drinkers, although there is some increase in how much consumers are drinking. Now, for those of us from European and maybe Australian markets, that per litre consumption seems very low. We might be looking at numbers of 20, 30, 40 litres per year in other markets. Why is it so low in the US? Well, because the number of wine drinkers out of the total population is only around 40%. So when you kind of calculate it out, if you've got lots of non-wine drinkers, which we do in the US, those that don't drink alcohol at all, or those that drink beer and liquor, it makes it feel like across the whole population they're drinking less. But our actual wine drinkers are pretty on par as they are in other markets. The focus of this presentation, as we said, was to look primarily at new consumers in the US. Millennials, everyone's talking about them. The new population of the future. Depending on what source you look at, millennials typically are those said to be born from 1980 to the year 2000, and that varies if you look at different sources. But that's the sort of chunk that we're looking at. So many of these are not yet, in the US market, legal age wine drinkers, or alcohol drinkers, legal age alcohol drinkers. So they're coming through, they will be coming through into our category. So we started with our base of 90 million regular wine drinkers in the US. Around a third of those regular wine drinkers in the US are millennials. So that's currently up to the 21 to 34 years old in the US market. So just shy of 30 million millennial regular wine drinkers. A third of the wine drinking population in the US are within this age bracket. So it's by far the fastest growing sector of the US market in terms of demographics. We also know about millennials, and we're going to come on to look at some of their trends and influences. Now, this comes straight from them, not from me, and clearly I'm not part of the millennial generation. It would be lovely if I was, but I'm clearly not. A quote from a respondent, a wine drinker that we spoke to actually in Delaware, and he said, "We're the millennial generation. We think the world belongs to us." So that's him saying it, not me. So I can, this sense of we rule the world, from a millennial perspective, we have authority, we have experience. It's quite self-focused and self-centered in terms of their lives, a lot more choices, a lot more experiences to have, more disposable income, less responsibility, and more parental input, care, and often finance, particularly with the housing market in many countries where millennials are struggling more than their parents' generation did to be able to purchase houses of their own, so are often living back post-education back in the family home, or renting, not being able to purchase because of changes in structures in many markets. So a population of drinkers who are very focused, self-focused, and also very aware. If we switch now to the other population that we're considering as newer to wine drinkers in the US market, Hispanic population. And why do Hispanics matter when it in the US market? Well, if immigration remains at current levels, so if everything remains consistent from now to 2050, the next 35 years, we will be looking at a Hispanic population in the US of 127 million. So a very much a growing population. We started back in 2000 with around 35 million Hispanics, so 13% of the US population. It's grown to nearly 17, actually now it's sitting at closer to 18%, and we're looking at that to being nearly a third of the US population by the year 2050. So not only is it growing per head, but it's growing, therefore, that as a population within the US is increasing in terms of spending power. Now this chart, you won't be able to see the detail from the back, but that's fine, it's about the shape. And what's interesting here is that the Hispanics are a much younger population than the US as a whole. So this one here on the left actually is the age group starting from the younger age to the older age of Hispanics, and then this one is the US population as a whole. So basically what you're seeing is the baby boomer bulge coming in the US population as a whole, but very much this younger population coming through through the Hispanic part of the population as that's growing. So it's considerably younger. And the other thing to note that of our, back to our, I'm going to be testing you on these numbers at the end, the 90 million regular wine drinkers, everybody will know that one by the end of today. We have around 6 million, just under 6 million Hispanic wine drinkers who are primarily English speakers, and then also around 6 million who are primarily Spanish speaking. So our population of Hispanic wine drinkers in the US is around 12 million of the total 90 million. Now, excuse me, clearly there's an overlap between Hispanics and Millennials, particularly as I was talking about them being, as a whole, a younger population. So there is a big crossover, which is why we're looking at and talking to, via our online surveys, direct face-to-face, focus groups, dinner party groups, talking to people in both of these generations. I'm just going to skip over this one. In terms of Hispanic wine drinkers, I'm sure, when we went into this research, were expecting, and did indeed see, that there is a stronger affinity to Hispanic countries of origin. So Spain, Chile and Argentina. Actually equal preference for Californian wines. So not unexpected. We would expect there to be a stronger cultural and heritage link. What was interesting is that there's a huge difference between first generation Hispanics, those that have come from their country of origin and arrived in the US, versus second and third generation, i.e. those that are born in the US to at least one parent of Hispanic origin. And what happens if you split this and you start to look at the difference, because this is non-Hispanics versus Hispanics, you look at first generation versus second and third generation is that this loyalty to Hispanic countries of origin disappears completely for second generation. They're not connecting, in wine terms, back to Hispanic countries. And interestingly, actually, they favour wine from Australia more than they favour wine from the Hispanic countries. And that's partly because of who they are. They're dominant female drinkers, so we see a higher percentage of second generation Hispanic female drinkers. They actually have a strong preference for white wine. They drink red wine, but they also have a strong preference as second generation crossover with millennials for white wine. And they therefore are looking at origins like California, like Australia, and not connecting so much into Spain, Chile and Argentina, and also New Zealand being a strong point of connection for them. We also know that within the household, growing up, spirits or liquor, as we would say in the US, is much more dominant. So they're not necessarily growing up in households that have wine cultures. So my parents drink liquor. This was a really interesting lady that we were talking to in New York, and she said, you go to a Dominican or Puerto Rican party, as in with her current contemporaries, where have you seen a bottle of wine? And then she went on to talk about, but if I'm with my other friends, then of course wine is the first thing that comes out. So there's still some cultural link and heritage there, but it really depends who these drinkers are with as to what their behaviour is. So the 10 rules for engaging America's new wine drinkers. I'm going to go through each of those: getting personal, tribal, looking and feeling good, I care, not so confident, experience or experiential, speak my language, take me seriously, looks count, and online. So these are the 10 rules that we learned from the pieces of work that we've been pulling together for this presentation. So getting personal, particularly for millennials, it's really important to engage with them on a one-on-one level. So when we were talking to them, they said things like, when you visit the vineyards, they open up bottles that you wouldn't otherwise get to try. That's the important bit in there. It's about millennials feeling like they have a one-on-one relationship with that wine. Now, in some cases, and obviously a minority of cases, they get to actually visit it, but it's the idea that they are treated, made to feel like the winery, the brand owner, the retailer care about them as an individual, because that's what millennials care about. They want it to be personal. They're used to this. They're used to this in their lives, having personalization. So it's really important for them to see this. And it's a great example of this in wine from Matsu. The sense of getting this, an ultimate example of getting personal in these labels. They actually representing the age of the vine, but this sense of it's personal from you to me. And what we found with millennials with this, that really strong connection, because it feels like somebody, the guys, as it happens to be on these bottles of wine, are talking directly to them, and they want things to be personal. Millennials are also, well, all of us, but millennials particularly, and Hispanics, within their community are tribal. We're all tribal animals, and we like and need to be part of a tribe. But it's particularly important to millennials as they create numerous tribes, both online and offline. So here, one we were talking to said, every month I go out with 3 friends to a steakhouse, and 3 or of us 4 will bring a bottle of red wine. We all get to try each other's wine, and the 4th person will judge. So this sense of I'm part of a community, I'm part of a tribe, I'm part of a group, and we're all doing the same thing, which is why personal recommendation is so strong within millennials. They want to hear another millennial recommending something to them because it makes them part of that tribe. And we also saw the same example with the Hispanics there. So a couple of examples of tribal in wine. this is in a US site, which is Wines Till Sold Out. We were talking, it's not dissimilar business model to was being talked about earlier. And what was interesting, we were in a discussion group in a restaurant, and one of the late girls in the discussion group was talking about WTSO, this, you know, when it's gone online website. About half of the other millennials in the group got their Blackberries and iPhones out and started looking it up and writing it down. Not because they were being rude, but because they were listening to the recommendation and thought, oh, well, if it's good for her, then that's something I should do. They also, interestingly, when we have these discussion groups around the US, were writing down, when other people in the group said, oh, I really love a particular wine, they were writing it down on their phone so that they could remember when they next went into a wine store. So this real sense of tribal and community is incredibly important. It's also important, rule number 3, for millennials to feel good and look good to others. So this is in the sense of ethically, sustainably produced. So there are two examples here with this notion of I see fair trade but I've never seen it in wine. And the fact that their belief is that wine is a farm, what one lady said, a farm-to-table product. You really experience the vineyard when you're drinking wine. So here, the sense or the essence behind this is that they're liking this sense of connection to feeling good about a product that they believe is both ethical and sustainable. Now, whether that's a reality or not is a debate we can have, but they really need this sense of ethical and sustainable, and that's what, in their perception, wine does. There's also an interesting comment. We had lots of conversations about alcohol levels, and the sense for millennials that wine is better because it delivers, compared to liquor, for example, more reasonable levels of alcohol, which they are conscious of. But one lady did talk about, we're all familiar with the skinny girl phenomena that's been going on in the US, and she did talk about the skinny girl, so much lower alcohol, low calorie wine, tastes like death. They take something out and something good is missing. So there's an interesting kind of balance between this one of, I want to feel good, I want to look good to others by engaging with sustainable and ethical businesses. I don't want to be seen necessarily to be drinking too much alcohol, but at the same time kind of don't mess with what you're going to give me because I quite like it. So there's an interesting balance going on there. Feeling and looking good in wine, how does this come through? Well, the image at the bottle is from New York State, this sense of buy New York wines. Again, what was quite interesting is talking to New Yorker, millennials and Hispanics, how few had been to New York wineries or were even aware that New York wineries existed just, up the road, several hours up the road from Manhattan and where they lived. So in New York, there's a big drive at the moment to buy local, support local, and fit in, which plays to this sense of fitting in with feeling and looking good. Sutter Home do some fantastic work on behalf of breast cancer in terms of donations for capsules received, setting up forums where you can log in and talk about experiences that you've had to share around the world. So some really good work that they're doing, and is really really connecting with both millennials and the Hispanics that we spoke to. And then this final one is a bar in San Francisco, which is an all-natural wine bar. So all the wines there are natural wines, and that's the focus of it. Millennials also care what other people think of them. It's really important. And I think the quote at the top summarizes it. I always try and find a wine that makes me look wealthy, but is actually not too expensive. So this sense of how am I not going to look embarrassed or bad or uneducated in terms of the wine choices that I take. Another one down here, sometimes I look up about types of wine online so I can contribute to a conversation. I try and learn some easy wine speak. So it's delivering to millennials and the Hispanics that we spoke to little tiny pieces of information that can be repeated to others, because it matters to these millennials what other people think of them. I'm just going to shout at the team, sorry, because this switches off, I can't see what the time is, and I'm conscious of overrunning. Thank you ever so much. So two really different examples of wines in the US market that talk about them. So the first one is coming from Trader Joe's, very retro in feel. It's bottled poetry is how they're describing it. So millennials were talking to, and Hispanics, talking to us a lot about how they're connecting with Trader Joe's as an experience and the wines that are within Trader Joe's. And then a complete opposite, and quite a few of the girls we spoke to did talk about, and I find it even difficult to say it, maybe it's because I'm British, but Sassy Bitch, which is the, thank you very much, the name of the wine. So again, saying something very different, and in the US we find a lot of wines that have standout names or labelling that means that for millennials they're connecting with these very different sorts of products. We also find with millennials and Hispanics, when we spoke to both populations, that they're not as confident as they seem, certainly the millennials when it comes to wine. I feel like I'm not as knowledgeable as I should be, said one. I go to the same store and ask for recommendations. I feel overwhelmed and end up just wandering around. So this outward millennial confidence in life does not necessarily come through to wine. There is a sense of, which is why they're coming back to recommendation, they're coming back to tribal behaviour, so that they're, you know, as long as everybody else in my tribe is buying and drinking this, it must be okay, so therefore it's something that I'm going to do. So there's definitely a sense of being overwhelmed. Even though they love wine and they like buying it, drinking it, it continues to be an increasingly overwhelming category. So in terms of help me with wine, ideas, again this comes from the Trader Joe's, which if you talk to consumers in the US at the moment, always comes out top of conversations, and the love of Trader Joe's, a bit like talking the love of Dan Murphy's when you talk to Australian consumers. And this is a very interesting one because this is about a very simple food and wine pairing. So they've got the wines by varietal, because of course in the US varietal is the dominant first choosing cue over country of origin or region of origin, which we would get in other markets. And then you have the different types of cheese going across the top, so they talk about blue cheese, goat's cheese, etc. And which wines pair to which types of goat's cheese, and that's from their website. And then in store, very clear signage which really is helping, and you can see there the dominance of the Zinfandel, the varietal being the key cue for both Hispanics and millennials. These two groups also want us, as the wine industry and other categories that they deal with, to talk their language and mirror their lifestyle. They want, I think this one sums it up totally here. Frank's, which is my local store, does this really cool thing where you can play table tennis in store to earn discounts on wine. I mean, if that is not the ultimate way to connect with the millennial generation in terms of, you have table tennis and you earn extra points, that I don't know what is. Also, talk my language in a literal sense with connecting with Hispanics, because as we said earlier, although many, obviously second generation, those born in the US are primarily English speaking, in their households with other generations, there's obviously a lot of Spanish speaking still going on and still a dominant language in the US. So a very thin line between how to balance and connect with Hispanic second generations in terms of fitting in culturally and talking the language, but also recognizing that for many of these people, they consider themselves quite rightly, because they are American, because they're born in America, but they have a kind of cultural connection. So the sense of how do you balance between those two to make sure that you're talking their language both metaphorically and literally. And here, two examples of that we witness in the US. Terroir is a chain of wine bars in New York City. And on a Monday night in one of them, which I had the pleasure of going to, it's a wine and heavy metal music night. Now, I'm not a very particular fan, personally, of heavy metal music, so it was an interesting evening for me. But the sense that they're connecting with a group of millennial consumers who love heavy rock, heavy metal music, and also happen to like wine. And the fact that actually the two can go hand in hand. So connecting in properly. We also had some lovely conversations about smaller serve size, and I'm actually going to be talking about that more in the innovation presentation, which is shortly to come. Again, millennials talking to us a lot about how they love smaller serve sizes. Sometimes because they want to drink something different to the person or people they're with. They don't necessarily drink wine, certainly at home, every evening. Often they're out, so if they're buying a bottle of wine and don't finish it, 75 cl, it may end up getting left at home, so that's not something they want to do. And also they like the look and the feel of it. It feels more special in some ways. So a lot of talk about, you know, wanting single serve. It's more convenient, it's easier, it delivers the wine I want. I don't necessarily end up with some being left over. We also know that millennials, and I talked about this at the beginning, are big on let me in on the experience. Life for millennials is much more experiential than for previous generations, partly because we can all travel so much more than we've ever done, partly because the world literally has opened up to us through the online platform. So being able to get to understand and have alternative experiences is particularly important. So how does this fit in with wine? This is a picture, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Wine Riot, which is an amazing organisation which hosts wine events targeted at millennials in various cities in the US. They have DJ booths, temporary tattoo parlours, they have 5-minute wine schools where those that go to the event can take wine seriously. So it's not about dumbing down wine, it's about giving bite-sized and accessible information to the consumers that go there so that they can actually learn something. They also have a live board where you can tweet your favourite wine that you've tasted, and they divide it by gender, you know, boys' favourite wine, girls' favourite wine, so that you can then go off and find the booth that has that particular wine if you want to see which wine is trending at the event. Their evening events, the lights, it feels a bit more like a kind of nightclub, but wine is at the heart of it and taken really seriously by both the organisers and those that go. They want to taste and try wine. Another example of this is one night in Argentina in the US, where they have a whole evening of everything Argentinian. So that primarily is the wine, but it's also the food, the music, the dance, the culture. This idea of immersing yourselves in the culture of Argentina. So there's just a couple of examples there. Millennials are also a little bit paranoid about us older people taking them seriously. So they sometimes feel, particularly when it comes to wine, that maybe they're not as respected as they would like to be. So they're talking here about, I don't think they're very polite to younger people like us in my local wine store because they're not taking me seriously. Sometimes in the wine store the guys can be a bit demeaning. I think it's because of my age. Now whether this is kind of paranoia and wanting to be taken more seriously or not, we can take a step back from that. But they don't want to be disrespected when it comes to wine. You know, they want to enjoy it. It's a great product. They love it. They want to learn. They want snippets of information to be able to help them, but they want it on their terms. We also know, for both when we were speaking directly and online to both millennials and Hispanics, how important looks are. Looks count big time when it comes to wine in the US. I really like the kitschy type labels. They draw me in, things like Bitch and Cupcake. First of all, I look for Pinot Noir, and then I look for the coolest label in my price point. I love Cupcake because I love the label. Cool names are what stands out to me. So it's really important for these newer drinkers in the US. The range of wines available to them is growing. What they can access is increasing. The confusion levels are going up. So one of the things that they do is they look for standout names and labels. So that's not to dismiss everything traditional and say that the only way forward in the US with new consumers is through kitschy labels, through humour, through lightheartedness. That's not the case necessarily, but be very aware that they they're starting often with what looks good within a broad repertoire, for example, of Pinot Noir or Chardonnay or Moscato. What's standing out to me? What will I remember? What can I recognise so that when I go back to a store, I can buy the same thing and I won't be disappointed because I've recognised it? And the one wine that people would not stop talking about in the last couple of weeks to us was Apothic. Wine that looks good. One Hispanic respondent said to us, it's sexy, it's gothic, it's classy, it's the one that I always go to. And a female millennial said to us, I know Apothic is good, I didn't care where it came from or what grape variety it is, because actually it's a red blend rather than a single varietal, which obviously in the US market is a smaller and emerging and growth category, and one that's not so well known. So for both the Hispanics and the millennials that we spoke to, Apothic is cool, it's sexy, it's classy. It's actually, the bottle, if you're not familiar with it, is quite heavy, physically quite heavy. Again, picture doesn't really do it justice here, but it's a tapered bottle, so it has a slight standout in terms of how it looks and how it feels. The paper quality is quite textured. The foil work is textured. So for them, it was a very sensual and tactile. And that's what they weren't talking about the flavour of the wine. All the comments were about the tactile, the positioning, the how it felt to them. And then when finally we prompted and said, well, what's the wine like? Oh yeah, that's good. So the wine was fine, but for them it wasn't about that. The wine was, tick the box, delivered what they wanted, but it was more to do with looking and feeling good. Online life. Most respondents that we spoke to rejected the idea of buying wine online. Now, the whole world is online, but they rejected the notion of buying wine online, mainly because it feels risky. They don't want to buy, for example, 6 bottles or 12 bottles of wine they don't know, get it home, and then they don't like it. It's a lot of money to spend. It feels like a big risk. They're not planners. So they're not I'm just checking on time here, we're doing all right? Yeah, we're doing okay. They're not planners. Typically when they're purchasing wine, it's to drink that day. They talk about the fact, I don't have a lot of space in my home, I might live in a small apartment, a shared house. I don't want to, if I buy a load of wine, all my housemates will drink it, and that's not very good for me. And they like this idea of personal recommendation and interaction in store. So buying wine online, although most of their lives are, much of their lives are conducted online, when it comes to buying wine online, it's not where they are. Information online, maybe, but typically, and I'll show you a couple of examples in a minute, that comes from their friends sharing social experiences that happen to include wine, rather than them actively seeking information online about wine. The only time they talked about buying wine online, considering buying wine online, was with wine they already knew. So it was maybe a convenient way of purchasing for a party or something like that, a brand that they already knew, or from their retailer that they already had a relationship with, where they could just go online and purchase it. There's also, and let's not forget this, the generation growing up behind my generation, who, and the quote there, people our age or younger tend to stay away from alcohol associations on Facebook. our online life print that we're creating, those clearly younger than me are much more aware of it. So this notion of being associated with, linked, liking alcohol, being seen potentially to be connected to or too much to alcohol can be a problem, and we particularly saw this in the US where, you know, potential employers, interviewers, university, you know, will be looking at your Facebook, will be looking at what you've got on LinkedIn, will be looking at people's online lives. So connecting too strongly with alcohol may be something that they're just stepping back from a little bit. So 2 examples. What we do know about their online lives when it comes to wine is it's great if it's part of their life, as opposed to a brand necessarily pushing wine at them. So if they will share, particularly images of them drinking wine, enjoying wine as part of a more responsible social occasion. But it's not specifically about an individual brand, typically. And why is craft beer ticking the box? And we couldn't, you know, we were trying to talk to them about wine, and a lot of the time, in a lot of our groups and discussions, craft beer kept coming up in the conversation. They tell us that the craft beer people have got it right for them. The names are fantastic, they're great visually, they stand out, they're engaging, and this idea that you can buy a 4-pack or a 6-pack of craft beer for $10 or $15. And somehow they felt that buying 4 for the same price as a bottle of wine somehow is not as risky. There's more of a risk to buying an individual bottle of wine that you don't know and maybe you don't like than there is in buying a pack of craft beer. So back to my point about kind of individual serves. They also talk a lot about with craft beer of understanding the classifications and the categories within craft beer, so like dark beer or the different categories, wheat beer, much more easily. So they can navigate the category and they know I like this type of beer, therefore I know what to experiment with. And they don't have that same notion in wine that they have these heuristics, these shortcuts to allow them to navigate. So what we do know is wine is all about connections. Actually, often for millennials and Hispanics, when we were speaking to them, particularly the second generation, younger ones, it wasn't about the wine. I stand at a wine fair where there's thousands and thousands of bottles and we're all communicating about wine. It wasn't about the wine, it's about connecting with stories from the winery potentially, connecting with their tribe, with other people, connecting with experiences, being out and about, and connecting with the businesses or the retailers sitting behind them. And primarily, wine is about connecting with their friends. So that's what wine is. It's this hub of connection. The wine itself just has to be fine. And because millennials and the newer Hispanic drinkers are less experienced in our category, they don't have a wealth of experience that they're drawing on in terms of what wine should or could taste like. As long as it's okay, that's great. If it stands out, they can remember the name, the label looks cool, it looks sexy, it looks sassy, it looks classic, whatever it happens to be, that's great. But this is all about connections. So from a wine brand owner perspective, what connections are you building, making, so that they can talk about you, so they can have a connection with you, even if they can't literally come and visit you. So to recap, these are the 10 rules for engaging with America's new wine drinkers. And this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the work that we will be publishing over the next few months. Oh, sorry, I was almost taking a picture of that one. Should I leave that one up? Tip of the iceberg in terms of the work that we're doing both with Hispanics and Millennials and other different wine drinking groups in the US market. We will, I'm looking at Steph now because I don't know the answer to which I should, we will be sending out to everybody that registered, or we'll be uploading the presentation to our website. Both, she's telling me, which is even better. So those that have attended will get an email with a link to the presentation, and we'll also upload it and we will be slightly mean and maybe not give away quite so much detail as I have today in the version that you get. I know everybody's really busy. I think I finished almost bang on time, so I'm going to stop there, but if you do have individual questions, please come and see me. Steph, my colleague, is over there. Ray, my other colleague, is over there, and Juan is at the back of the room as well. So there's 4 of us here from Wine Intelligence. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.